Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello, welcome again to our ongoing discussion on drama and theatre. Please quickly recall what we did in the previous class. We discussed modern drama, and before that we discussed origins of drama, Greek origins of drama, and we went through Roman drama, Elizabethan drama and all that. Okay. So, in this class, based on our understanding of that, if I can ask you a question, can you or can me or can any literary historian precisely pinpoint the exact moment or the place where modern drama was born? Do you think we are up to the task? Do you think we can grab the challenge and answer that? Well, a couple of literary historians have done that, and in fact they have identified not just the exact date, moment, they have also identified the place in which modern drama was born. Okay. To give you an answer to that question, modern drama was born on December 4th in the evening in the year 1879. Where was it born? Well, it was born in one of the theatres in Copenhagen. A little more dramatically speaking, it was born towards the evening while a play was being performed in a theatre in Copenhagen, especially when the play was towards its, reached its climax, the modern drama was born. Therefore, there are two dates, December 4th when the play was first published, and for the wider audience to reach, you can even call December 21st, 1879 when the modern drama was enacted, The drama in question is Ed Dukem, a Norwegian drama published by a writer who was not very well known. Of course, even before this particular play he had written a couple of plays, but this particular play called Ed Dukem, in fact this inaugurated the modern drama, So, please remember these three things: Ed Dukem, a Norwegian play, December 4th, 1879 when it was published, and December 21st, 1879 when it was staged for the first time in Copenhagen. These are very important dates and names. Though the playwright had written several plays before this, if there was one play that catapulted him onto the world stage, this was this particular play. Why? What was so significant here? Because the protagonist of the play, Nora, during the climax, she just slams the door behind her, leaving her husband, respectable marriage and lovely children. And why does she leave such a beautiful house? Well, of course, she leaves in search of an uncertain future because she wants to discover her own self. Does it happen, or did it happen in the 19th century? Of course, this is what the play did. And for the first time, the play in a very daring way, it performed an anatomy of social, psychological, cultural, emotional and moral truths beneath the placid surface of respectable marriage. That happened for the first time. And as I said, literary historians have identified three golden points when it comes to history of drama. Of course, the first time is when you have the triumvirate publishing their plays, and when they were getting enacted in the ancient Greece, the classical Hellenic period. That's the first golden point. The second golden point comes when Shakespeare arrives onto the stage, and when his plays are being performed. And the third golden moment or watershed moment comes with Ibsen's publication of Ed Dukem. Well, isn't it so strange that we are discussing a Norwegian play? Not really, because this play is one of the most performed plays after Shakespeare. In fact, Ibsen is one of the most performed playwrights, and probably you and I may have heard of the play. In English, it's called A Doll's House. Especially in the year 2006 and 16, this was considered one of the most performed plays, something like that. Therefore, Doll's House becomes a very, very important play for us, and Henrik Ibsen becomes an extraordinary writer. Let's go ahead and take a look at a little bit of context, the writer and all that. Henrik Johan Ibsen was a Norwegian playwright. We have already identified that, but he is a playwright who is perennially in a state of exile, because even while in Norway, it is said that he was constantly in exile, and he was a kind of a restless soul. Remember, literature is born out of some kind of a creative unrest. Therefore, he did not conform to the moral prescriptions of society. He always questioned society and wanted to, create some new paths. And in fact, it's said that on his deathbed, the last words that he seemed to have uttered were "on the contrary." Of course, in Norwegian, "on the contrary." What a befitting epitaph for a writer who shook the entire society out of its complacency, right? On the contrary, that's the last words of the writer. Because of his contribution, he is considered as the father of modern drama, and more than that, within that, there is a genre of drama called realistic drama. He seemed to have inaugurated this particular type of drama. Therefore, he is rightly called father of realism. Okay, and well, he belongs to those rare category of writers who had extraordinary talent and potential to get Nobel, but did not get it for political reasons, right? So remember, more than those writers who got Nobel, we have been busy reading those writers who had all the potential to get Nobel but could not get it, or did not get it for various political reasons. And this guy too was nominated several times for Nobel, but he missed it. Well, some of his well-known works include An Enemy of the People. Of course, you may have watched the movie An Enemy of the State. This is Enemy of the People. More than that, A Doll's House. In fact, if there is one play that has brought an extraordinary name and fame to the writer, this is A Doll's House. But when it comes to artistic merit, you have Hedda Gabler, Ghosts, and The Master Builder. They, in terms of exquisite dramaturgy, craftsmanship, they are remarkable plays. Well, he created a lot of unrest in society, because when Doll's House was first published, if there is one play that was discussed widely, even in the non-theatre circles, undoubtedly it is Doll's House, because, well, the ending was scandalous. Nobody even accepted the ending. In fact, one of the leading lady actors who was supposed to perform the role of Nora in Germany, she refused to play the role. In Germany, she refused to play the role, and therefore they even wanted to change the ending. But of course, Ibsen almost protested, right? And it is said that during those times, especially in Norway and Italy where he was staying, and even in Germany, where during social gatherings, usually you send out an invite, right? Well, on the invite, towards the end of it, P.S. you are requested not to discuss A Doll's House when you come to the party. So, a special mention of, not to discuss A Doll's House. Now, you can imagine the kind of disturbance this play must have caused to the so-called comfort of society or the elite, something like that. So, as one of the literary critics later remarked, it almost, gave a shock value to European society to such an extent that probably Europe required many decades to recover from the shock that A Doll's House gave, something like this. and as we have already said, Ibsen is the most performed dramatist, probably next only to Shakespeare, and in a couple of years A Doll's House was the world's most performed play, you know. So this is, I guess this should suffice to create an interest in you, and I am sure you should be really tempted to go and read the play. Please do that. Of course, these classes are no substitute for not reading it. Remember, the interest, the purpose is to pique your interest in that. Let us go take a look at, these are a couple of interesting things that Ibsen says, you know. It is the very mark of the spirit of rebellion to crave for happiness in this life. Well, if you really want happiness in this life, that is the most daring act of rebellion you could be making. And now look at this, you may have read in many visiting cards, or more than that, greeting cards and all that. Money may bring you food, but not appetite. It can buy you medicine, but not health. Well, of course, money can definitely buy you acquaintances, but not true friends, something like that. An extraordinary playwright, more than that, you know, a conscientious writer who did not compromise on the integrity of the writer even towards the end. Well, he had to pay a lot of you know, a heavy price for not compromising onto his ideals, for his ideals. Well, of course, he was still happy with it, you know, a great writer with great integrity, a rare breed, especially these days, to come by, right. Let us go ahead and take a look at A Doll's House, this remarkable play. While you keep contemplating on the title itself is slightly unique, right? A Doll's House. What is the doll here? What is the house? Of course, the entire title, not just the title, the entire play is replete with symbolic meaning. So, I mean, the more you dig, the more layers of meanings you discover in the play. Let us go take a quick look at the play, okay. This is just a background, and we identified that it was first written in Norwegian. This is the first manuscript. What you have there is a photocopy or an excerpt from the first manuscript, probably in the writer's own handwriting. We do not know that for sure, but definitely the first appearance, okay. And we have also identified that it premiered on 21st December in 1879 by Ibsen, and this is a play in 3 acts. Usually, you know, until that point of time, you saw plays with 5 acts, a full-fledged play with 5 acts, and you know, he also seemed to have, though not you know, introduced a 3-act play. Of course, he popularized it, Ibsen popularized it. Well, it is said that A Doll's House is based on the life of Laura Keeler, a friend of Ibsen, but we do not need to concern ourselves with that, right, because if a play would, there might be several reasons behind the birth of a play, but or art, you know, but an art, any artistic piece does not you know, stay put in the place it is born. It always grows to become universal, right. It is born locally and, you know, grows to become universal, you know, grows universally, something like that. That is why we read all these things. And as I said, it created a storm and outraged the modesty of the Victorian values of marriage and family. That is the reason why, of course, it went on to acquire a kind of infamy in the beginning, but later, of course, extraordinary fame. And many critics have also identified it as, you know, probably after, you know, Medea and Antigone during the classical period of Greece, if there was one play that championed the cause of women, it is undoubtedly Ibsen's A Doll's House, you know. If there is one play that championed the cause of women and gave an impetus to various waves of feminism, you know, then of course undoubtedly it is Ibsen's Doll's House. Yeah, we are going to discuss you know, especially this much talked of the last scene where Nora closes the door on her husband and children, because a particular critic says that, you know, she may have closed the door on her husband and children, but she opened a new door to the turn of centuries women's movement, you know. So, the door she may have closed opens a new door for feminism, you know, something like this. Now, let us take a quick look at major characters in the play. These are major characters. You have Nora, the protagonist. In fact, as I said, if there is one strong female characters in the history of drama, probably after the Greek period, it is only in Ibsen's Doll's House, a very strong female protagonist. Okay. So, Nora is a very well known and almost a legendary protagonist that we have in literature drama. Well, her husband treats her as a doll, and of course, she seems to be okay with it initially, but a moment of self reckoning comes and therefore she refuses to stay within that confine, Nora. And you have in Torvald Hemmer, Nora's husband, okay, supporting character, but more than that, he is a very flat character, a static character or a flat character. Think of our discussion on flat characters. Initially, he was a lawyer, but when the play begins, we hear that he has been made a bank manager, and he has certain plans for the family and all that. Torvald Hemmer. We have Dr. Rank, a supporting character, a major character, because through Dr. Rank, Ibsen explores many of his pet themes, especially genetics, the concept of platonic love and all that. So, a major character, supporting character, and so is Mrs. Christine Lind, a close friend of Nora. Of course, both Dr. Rank is a family friend. He is first a friend to Torvald Hemmer, but later he is drawn towards Nora, and Christine Lind is an old friend of Nora, who is a widow, and once she is romantically also involved with the antagonist of the play, Niels Krogstad. So, Niels Krogstad is an antagonist here. He is an employee in the bank where Torvald is about to be the manager, but the play discusses him as having morally corrupt character in quotes, because later when the play ends, we know that there are more morally depraved characters than Niels Krogstad that we are going to discuss. But for our understanding of characters, we have identified protagonist in Nora, antagonist in Niels Krogstad, and Torvald Hemmer, a flat character, Dr. Rank and Mrs. Christine Lind. Christine Lind can also be a confidante character, because Nora confides many things in Christine Lind. Okay. Let us go ahead and jump into the setting. This is a play that the entire play, dramatic action, takes place in just the house of Hemmers, especially in the drawing room or in the living room. And therefore, it maintains the three unities that we discussed in the Greek context, unity of action, because action takes place at a particular place, unity of time, it happens in a span of 3 days. Again, that is very interesting. The play is set in the backdrop of Christmas Eve, and the second act begins on Christmas Day, and probably third act begins on a day after Christmas, just 3 days. And then you have unity of time, unity of action, and unity of place. Of course, the entire play is set in the living room of Hemmers. This is something that can be kept in mind. For our general understanding, let us take a quick look at how the plot progresses from act to act. When the scene begins, which is act 1, we see Nora in a very jovial state, because she is decorating her house, and a porter has just entered and delivered her a Christmas tree, because the next day is Christmas. She is decorating, she has brought some gifts, but of course she hurriedly hides those gifts so that she does not spoil the surprise for kids and of course her husband Hemmer. And when she is busy doing all that, her husband walks in, and then looking at all the gifts that she has bought, almost in a very romantic way, he chastises her. He calls her, my little skylark, my little squirrel, my darling, and all that. So, when the play opens, you see them almost, the picture that you get is it must be a romantic couple, something like that. And of course, this Christmas is also special for them, because it has announced that earlier, until that point of time, the family was a lot of financial crisis was there in the family. Now that Torvald is about to be made the bank manager, the dark days are left behind. So, therefore, they are also celebrating Torvald's promotion as a bank manager. So, when they are busy doing this, we are introduced to the two supporting characters, Mrs. Lind and Dr. Rank. They are family friends, you could say, and Mrs. Lind is a confidante character, and they haven't met. In fact, especially Christine, that's her first name of Mrs. Lind. So, they haven't met each other for many years, right. So, now she says that she is a widow now, and she has enough money, but probably in order to while away time, she needs a good job, and she is also educated. Therefore, Nora promises, fine, let me ask my husband if I can get you a job in his office, That's precisely what happens in Act 1 when it begins, and then what happens, we find Nora revealing a long held secret. Of course, it is a confidante character. Also the writer employs a foreshadowing technique here. Nora confides in Mrs. Lind that she has done a blunder, because earlier, about 6-7 years ago, Torvald was in very bad shape. His health had deteriorated like anything, and he also didn't have enough money, no good job and all that. During such times, without informing her husband, she has borrowed money from someone else, and without, of course, letting her husband so far doesn't know, because somehow she has been managing. Her husband, she is under the impression that her husband is very morally upright character who does not encourage neither borrower, don't be a borrower nor be a lender be, something like that. He wants to be financially independent and all that. Therefore, without informing him, she is earning some money from some odd jobs and repaying the debt that she has taken 7 years ago. And of course, Christine urges her friend to inform her husband, but she says no, this may not be a right time and all that. Okay, while they are speaking, we are introduced to the antagonist of the play, Niels Krogstad. Remember, he is an employee in the same bank. What has happened there? Well, Torvald doesn't like Niels Krogstad. Therefore, the moment he has assumed charge, he is about to fire Niels Krogstad. Okay, he is about to fire Niels Krogstad because he thinks Krogstad is morally corrupt, and even the presence of such a character in his bank might spoil the morale of his fellow characters and fellow employees. Therefore, he wants to dismiss him, and Niels Krogstad has come to request him not to do that, but he also has some other purpose which will be later revealed. And by then, of course, what happens, Nora has requested her husband to give a job to her friend Christine, and of course, her husband also agrees. So, that is when everything happens, and while this is happening there, you find Krogstad entering. He has already finished speaking with Torvald, and Torvald hasn't agreed to retain him, and now he has come to meet Nora. Well, this is where the curiosity builds. Why has he come to meet Nora? Well, in the conversation that follows, we learn that Nora 7 years ago borrowed money from Krogstad. It was this guy that she had borrowed money, and now she is about to repay the entire amount. Maybe some amount is left, and she is about to repay. Now, he requests her that you will have to help me retain my job because I have my kids. If your husband removes me from the job, then the kids will be thrown to the street, and the entire family will have to come onto the street and all that. But she can't promise anything. That's when he blackmails her. He says that he is going to reveal a secret. What is the secret? That it's not just that Nora has borrowed money from him as a surety, because when you are borrowing money, you have to give surety, right? She has forged the signature of her dying father. Her father was about to die or had just died. She forged her father's signature to borrow money from Krogstad, and Krogstad tells her that he knows that particular secret and he is going to expose the entire family. So, now this puts some kind of tension. Of course, you can spot Freytag's various models, more of it in the next class. Well, in Act 2, of course, now it's the Christmas day and everything is in a very happy mood. Now of course Nora, now she is scared now because it's a happy family. She does not want Krogstad to spoil the the bonhomie that they share with each other. She tries to persuade Thorvald, her husband, not to fire him. In fact, Thorvald Hemmer is very much disturbed. He almost scolds her for not interfering in his work. For him, morality is everything, because he is unable to even withstand the presence of a morally corrupt character. Then you find, Nora is unsuccessful, and then Dr. Rank comes, an important character. That relationship is beautiful. If you want to know the subplot between Dr. Rank and Nora, you have to read the play, right? So Dr. Rank reveals that he is about to die, and Nora initially thinks of borrowing money from Ranks to repay the money that she owes to Krogstad. But when she hears that Rank is suffering from some kind of disease that he seemed to have inherited from his father, well, she doesn't feel like asking him. And of course, that's when Mrs. Lind comes, Christine, and when Christine learns that Nora is in great trouble, so she tells Nora, don't worry, I'll try to help you, because it seems in the past she was in a kind of romantically in a relationship with Krogstad. So she says, let me see what I can do, let me see what I can do. I can help Krogstad not to pressurize you or something like that, not to blackmail you. But of course, this is an important thing. Then what happens here? Krogstad comes and says that if she doesn't save, then he is about to deliver the news to her husband that she had forged the letter and all that. Now Nora is absolutely unhappy, but she is unable to convince her husband to take him back, and she is also unable to convince him not to trouble her. She doesn't know what to do, and now of course in the meanwhile, when she tries to pressurize her husband, he has already dismissed. He dispatches a letter of dismissal, and of course Krogstad comes, and now what he says, now he drops a letter in the mailbox of Nora's husband, wherein he has explained everything. He has explained everything. Now when Act 3 begins, Act 3 begins on a day after Christmas. We find Christine convincing Krogstad that he should not do it. By then, unfortunately, Krogstad has already dropped a letter in the mailbox. There is no way to retrieve that letter, and Krogstad realizes the mistake, and he says, okay, if it comes to that, he will go and personally request Thorvald not to take it to heart and all that. But in the meanwhile, Thorvald is about to open the letter, but Nora somehow convinces him not to open the letter until for some time, because they have a ball to attend, they have a dance party to attend and all that. So Thorvald, her husband, promises her, okay, he would open the letter a little later, something like this. Now all that happens. Now of course, this is when of course Christine also tells Krogstad that now that she is a widow and now that he is a widower, they can marry each other and live a happy life. Why trouble the Hemmers? And that convinces Krogstad. Now of course, after the party, we learn that Thorvald goes to his study and picks up the letter, and now looking at the letter, he is furious. He comes out and scolds Nora like anything. He says, you have almost no sense of shame, you are morally depraved. How could you even think of writing a letter, forging your father's signature? Well, she tries to explain to him that it was to save his own life, but he doesn't understand all that. So what is otherwise an altruistic act by Nora to save the life of her husband becomes a villainous act in the eyes of her husband. So he almost shouts at her and says she is even unfit to be his wife, unfit to be the mother to his children and all that, and she doesn't know what to do. She is about to, she thinks of committing suicide and all that, so that's what she says. And now remember what has happened. Krogstad has delivered another letter, wherein of course now Krogstad says that he is no longer interested in exposing Thorvald, and he does not mind losing the job, because anyhow it is going to his would be Christine. Therefore, he says he has forgiven everything. Now, the moment Thorvald receives that, he says he is again happy. He says, okay, now do not worry, do not bother, Krogstad is not going to blackmail me, I am saved, and when I am saved, you are saved, something like this. This is a moment of reckoning, this is a moment of awakening for Nora. In fact, until now, this point of time, Nora was under the impression that he is more concerned about the standards of morality, conscience and all that, but now she realizes that her husband is nothing more than a self-obsessed prick. All that his concern was not because for any sense of morality, because he was scared that his name would be spoiled and Krogstad would blackmail him. Once he learns that Krogstad has forgiven him, he forgets all the issues of morality and tries to talk to Nora in the very old way, my little darling, you my little bird and all that. Of course, that is when our protagonist has learnt that her value in the family. It is not because he likes her, not because of her individual worth, but because it suits him. Okay, so she is even disillusioned with the character. Until that point of time, she thought that this guy is morally upright, therefore she has done some kind of a mistake. Now she realizes that all that he cared was saving his skin at the expense of his wife's reputation. She thinks this is time. Therefore, when the play ends, she almost says that no, I will no longer live with you. And when Thorvald tries to convince her, no, you have kids, you have responsibility, she says, no, you take care of the kids. Just a while ago you shouted at me saying that I am unfit to raise my children. You may be right, but I have more than my duty as a mother and wife. I have a duty towards myself, and therefore in order to understand myself better, I am walking out of this family, I am walking out of this relationship. You can take care of the kids, the nanny can take care of the kids. Saying that, she walks out of the house, with a bang on the door. And later, of course, and therefore the play ends with Nora exiting. So the loud sound of door shutting is heard heralding an onset of a journey that Nora undertakes, wherein this journey takes her from illusion to illumination. That is what a critic says. Okay, this is in nutshell what happens in the play, right? Of course, many debates can take place whether she was justified in leaving her husband, her family, her duties. What is all this? We can pick up a critical discussion on that in the next class. All right. Please read the play, and then of course you would understand the play all the more better. We will meet you in the next class.